The UFC fight fixing scandal that has had the entire community going crazy for 2 days since it happened has some new information that we got to catch up on. Actually, quite a bit of new information, like a lot. And just to bring you up to speed, if you don't know what's going on, UFC prelim fight from this past weekend between Isaac Dulgarian and Wyatt has been flagged for suspicious betting activity, and many people are questioning or, convinced that Isaac Dulgarian threw the fight and lost in the first round via sub on purpose to get paid by somebody. We don't know who yet, but that he got paid by somebody to throw the fight because the line in favor of Dulgarian went from -250 to -125 in 2 hours, and Del Valle round one finish went from +850 to +400. Now, we're going to get into it because this is a crazy scandal. This could have the UFC in quite a bit of trouble and under an FBI microscope, even more than pro sports already is. So if this is your first time seeing my channel, my name is Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. Let's get into it. So first off, the fight between Isaac Dulgarian and Wyatt that many people are calling fixed was not the only suspicious fight on the card. I also called into question David Onama getting TKO'd in round one in the main event by Steve Garcia, because Onama, who's normally very dynamic and durable, was a punching bag for 2 or so minutes and got TKO'd in the first round without really throwing anything back. And what makes it sus as well is that he is Isaac Dulgarian's teammate, and both of these guys are former training partners and students of disgraced UFC fighter and former coach James Krause. Now, there's also been judges and referees brought into this scandal because a prelim fight on this card as well, Norma Dumont versus Ketlin Vieira, had a very controversial outcome where Norma Dumont won by split decision, and many people, including myself, think that Ketlin Vieira should have got the win in that fight. So not only do we have fighters implicated in this scandal, we also have judges and referees being implicated. Let's get into the juicy stuff, because Isaac Dulgarian has been officially cut from the UFC. Now, the UFC cited the reason for being released as his loss to Wyatt Del Valle, just the loss in general. They did not specify that it had anything to do with this gambling scandal. But of course, that's them saving face, in my opinion, because we have a lot to get into that points to, one, Isaac Dulgarian being paid to take a fall, and also the UFC knowing about it and letting the fight continue. So Isaac Dulgarian is cut from the UFC. His purse is being withheld by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, similar to when Derek Minner got caught up in the James Krause scandal. His purse was withheld. Same with Khabib jumping over the octagon barrier and attacking Dylan Dennis after he beat Conor McGregor. He had his purse withheld for an amount of time as well while they investigated the incident. So Isaac Dulgarian not only disgraced himself and his career and his gym and coaches, he also is no longer in the UFC. He's going to be blacklisted from major promotions. His purse has been withheld. So hopefully this money that he might have received to throw this fight was enough to tank your entire career as a very promising prospect. Now, where this starts to get really, really sticky for Isaac Dulgarian, his appearance on the MMA Junkie podcast or channel, where he said that fighters should get a percentage of sports bets. And this was very, very recently, like during fight week. He said that fighters should get a percentage of the bets, or at least the winning bets that are made on them. And this was posted by Hey Jive Picks, really great content creator as well. He brought this clip in from the MMA Junkie show. And this is what Isaac Dulgarian said on that show regarding fighters receiving a kickback, essentially, if a winning bet was placed on them.
I say, don't bet on me unless you're paying me some percentage. I'm doing all the work. That's how I feel about it. You know what I mean? Like, I work my ass off every day. I'm trying to support a family with this, and I think they should put some type of clause, like 3 or 5% of what you make goes to the fighter. So that's how I think they should do it, because we're the ones putting our lives on the line. We're the ones sacrificing everything, training all day long, losing a social life, all that type of stuff. So yeah, if you're betting on me, I want some of it.
And there he is saying, if you're betting on me, I want some of it. And I'll get to the MMA Junkie guys in a second, because the mainstream media that gets press credentials to UFC events has not covered this in the slightest, okay? They're asleep at the wheel. They are not doing any real journalism here. And it's been left up to journalists that have no affiliation with the UFC, like Ariel Helwani, Harry Mack, who we'll get to in a minute, and content creators like Hey Jive Picks, myself. That's basically it, is YouTubers and content creators and a couple of non-UFC affiliated journalists like Ariel Helwani. But people like this that get press passes to the UFC events are not saying shit about this. And they didn't give any pushback about this as well. So there is Isaac Dulgarian saying, don't bet on me unless you're giving me some of it. Now, the UFC has released an official statement here regarding the Isaac Dulgarian situation. And they said, like many professional sports organizations, UFC works with an independent betting integrity service to monitor wagering activity on our events. Our betting integrity partner, IC360, monitors wagering on every UFC event and is conducting a thorough review of the facts surrounding the Dulgarian versus Del Valle bout on Saturday, November 1st. We take these allegations very seriously, and along with the health and safety of our fighters, nothing is more important than the integrity of our sport. And while this is kind of to save face saying that they're looking into it, to me, this is a statement of a bunch of nothing. This is just hoopla saying we're looking into it. It's not even accusing Isaac Dulgarian of being involved with anything. It's frankly a half-assed statement to cover their ass for the next, I don't know, day or two while they get something sorted here. But they literally cut Isaac Dulgarian and said it had nothing to do with the scandal, despite him having a winning UFC record. And then they go and make a statement saying they're investigating it. It sounds like they have already got some info that they're not ready to share. And what's crazy about this too is that the UFC has created this problem for themselves. And we'll get to that in a moment. But the UFC fighter pay, or the lack thereof of UFC fighter pay, is what creates an issue like this. And I know plenty of people in the comments of my first video about this were saying it's disgraceful that I would even slightly defend the fighters that are doing this. But I had to play devil's advocate because these guys are getting paid $10,000 to show, $10,000 to win. They don't have any like monthly stipend or insurance. And these guys have kids and families to feed. And what I was saying by playing devil's advocate is that if I was in that type of situation, fighting for my dream, making maybe $40K a year, and I got a wife and kids, I don't know what I'd do if I was approached in this situation. And that's just being honest. It's a rock and a hard place for a lot of these fighters. And this is mainly directed at the prelim guys that are on shit, really low level contracts that can't support themselves. Like nobody's going to go to Alex Pereira, who's making $3, $4, $5 million a fight plus sponsorships and say, yo, throw this fight against Ankalaev, because they probably couldn't offer him enough money to sacrifice his integrity or his career at this point being a UFC champion. But these guys that are still on the come up, they got to pay rent, you know? So, I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. This is a UFC created problem. And the real juicy part of this comes in the form of Ariel Helwani's show today, where he says that he has been approached and it has been made very clear to him that this Isaac Dulgarian incident is not in any way an isolated incident, and that he has been told by multiple people that MMA fighters have been approached about their willingness to throw fights for money. This is the clip right here.
This is on the FBI's radar. How deep of an investigation is unclear at this time. This is all very new, but yes, it is accurate. I believe there's a gentleman named Harry Mack on social media who is having a nice little victory tour after all of this, and I'm sure he's going to have another one. I'm not familiar with his work, but he did write that yesterday. And so that is my understanding. And my understanding is that this is not an isolated incident. And what I mean by that is I have talked to multiple people who have either experienced or know of others who experienced situations where they have been approached about their willingness to do something like this.
Very interesting that prelim level fighters that are making 10 and 10, 12 and 12, whatever it is on their contract, have just been approached in the gym saying, hey, would you be down? Not saying, will you, like, here's an official offer, here's a bag of money, go do this. But, you know, feelers have been sent out about like, hey, would you do this? Would you throw this fight for X amount of money?
I have been told by multiple people that they have been approached, they have been talked to and said, are you interested in this? Are you interested in throwing a fight for X amount of dollars? Believe that's what happened with Darrick Minner. And all signs right now are pointing to something of that sort happening here. This is a massive issue for the UFC. And when you consider, now I haven't been told this part that I'm about to say, when you consider the questionable refereeing as of late, you can't help. I said this last week. You can't help but let your mind go there as well, because there's no other possible explanation for some of the wacky stuff that we have seen as of late.
And I agree with that as well, because we've had terrible judging and terrible reffing. Seems like very, very often. Eye pokes that are not being addressed in the right way, cage grabs not being addressed in the right way, very, very quick stand-ups in some fights, such as the Jailton Almeida and Volkov fight. I don't necessarily disagree with all of them. Very, very questionable refereeing and judging taking place, such as the Norma Dumont and Ketlin Vieira split decision that I just mentioned from last weekend, and other fights like Paddy Pimblett beating Jared Gordon. We all watched that fight. Paddy Pimblett arguably lost that fight 30-27, and he even kind of like jokes about it now, about not winning that fight. But in the moment, he was very sure of it. But many people are in total agreement of Paddy Pimblett lost to Jared Gordon, or Ketlin Vieira should have beat Norma Dumont. The list goes on and on. There's plenty of bad decisions. And now that we get presented with this information that fighters and potentially officials as well are being approached about fucking up fights on purpose for X amount of money, a lot of these questionable decisions start to make a lot of sense, or they just start to seem very, very suspicious.
It's very easy to do. It's extremely easy to do. We've seen it. We've now seen it in broad daylight multiple times. And I think what is happening here, adding 1 + 1 + 1, I believe what is happening here is people are preying on lower level fighters who don't make a lot of money, who are in tough spots, who are fighting in the major leagues, and they're offering them a quick fix. They're not going to like the top dogs, but they're offering a quick fix to the lower level fighters. How prevalent is this? I can't tell you, but I've now heard it multiple occasions in my conversations over the past 24+ hours saying, are you interested? And that's a huge problem. And so how big of a story this becomes remains to be seen. But this is happening in gyms, in private. This is a big story.
So there it is right there. This is a big story. It's happening in gyms, in private. And I know a few pro fighters that I'm definitely going to ask if they've ever been approached about something like this. And I have a little bit of communication with some fighters' managers as well. And it seems like you have a set of managers, fighters, and coaches that may be in with some sort of betting ring or people involved with these bets that are willing to throw this. And then you have another group of managers and fighters and coaches that from a moral standpoint and an integrity standpoint towards the sport that they dedicate their life to would never want to be involved with something like this. This is where it starts to get tricky, because then you have to start looking at managers, because managers are tied in with sponsors, and a lot of these sponsors are betting companies like DraftKings or Prize Picks and so on. I'm not saying those companies specifically are guilty of fight fixing. I'm just saying that managers are involved in getting their fighters these sponsors, their coaches, and then you also have the UFC is very much in bed with managers such as Ali Abdelaziz, Jason House from Iridium Sports. He's been called into question. We'll get to that later in the video. But now you're starting to question the validity of the entire sport. And this is vastly different than Chauncey Billups or Terry Rozier, who have multi-million-dollar NBA contracts. Maybe they have a gambling addiction or some sort of want to do this versus need. And then you have prelim UFC fighters that might have like $40 in their bank account, rent due next week, and they don't fight for another 2 months to get paid their $10,000, where they are going to be on the street or their kids are going to be going hungry if they don't essentially compromise the integrity of their career and the sport. So this is getting really, really messy. But here we actually have UFC veteran Vince Morales, who has 12 or 11 fights in the UFC. He said that he's actually been approached. He tweeted, he said, all this throwing the fight stuff is crazy. I've been approached about doing it, and it's not something I could live with, even though I ended up losing the damn fight anyways, LOL. And somebody commented back saying, how much were you offered? And he said, pennies, considering how big of a deal it is, $70K. That's a good baseline for us to see that fighters that are on a 10-10 contract or a 12-12 contract, somebody on that deal getting offered 70 grand to throw a fight is life-changing money. It's a quick fix, like Ariel Helwani said. It's a quick fix for some serious financial problems that these fighters face. And I mean, shout out to Vince Morales for having like the morals and the backbone to not give into that when he could have taken the money. But holy shit, that is, compared to a 12-12 contract, $70K is a lot of fucking money. It's more than they would make an entire year. So let me know what you guys think. Knowing that this is the amount, being offered to prelim fighters, does it justify them, you know, taking and throwing a fight for the sake of feeding their families? I don't think so. I think it's still a dirty, rotten thing to do, but I'm starting to understand the logic behind it more and more. And these are humans, you know, people got kids to feed. I'm starting to understand why, especially considering how dire some fighters' financial situations are. Quick break. If you're loving this video and you want more from Fight Society, click that join button down below to become a channel member today, where you'll get access to members-only live streams, behind-the-scenes vlogs, and all the unfiltered stuff that we don't post to the main channel. Back to the video. Ariel says that the FBI is looking into this, and the FBI is looking into this. We don't know how deeply, but I'm starting to think that there's a possibility that Dana White has known that this type of problem was on the horizon and that this was in existence. And that's why Dana White has put himself so close to the likes of the current president, Donald Trump, the current FBI director, Kash Patel, and even Kash Patel getting celebrity shout outs right here. You see it right here during a UFC broadcast, UFC FBI director Kash Patel with Adam Martin from MMA Fighting, I believe MMA Fighting, saying Kash Patel needs to investigate MMA/UFC betting next. But now we're starting to see the friendships that Dana White has got himself into with very politically powerful people, including Kash Patel, saying that he is dead serious about having FBI agents train with the UFC on martial arts and self-defense tactics. This looks like Dana White may have been positioning himself and the UFC all along to be protected from a scandal like this, because I can already see, I mean, not to get crazy political about it and crazy conspiratorial about it, but we did see like the Epstein files kind of just disappear. And now they're people acting like they never ever existed. I could very much see the FBI, quote unquote, looking into the UFC betting problem just for them to find that there was no problems, or that the problems never existed and a fight's never been thrown. I know that's a little bit of a stretch, but it is a possibility, and it is where my mind goes when we talk about the FBI investigating the UFC, considering that the UFC president and former owner is like besties with the president and with Kash Patel. So, and here we move on to the journalist that Ariel Helwani referenced in his clip, named Harry Mack. And Harry Mack has been going hard on social media about this scandal. He apparently, especially if Ariel Helwani, the top journalist in the game for MMA, who vets his sources very, very thoroughly, even Ariel is acknowledging the validity of what Harry Mack has to say. It's worth listening to. And he's on a victory tour because he got a lot of shit from some UFC paid mouthpieces, in my opinion. And now here he is with a little bit of a victory tour now that the rest of the internet and big journalists are starting to back his story. This says, very important tidbit here. The FBI notified the UFC of the abnormal action and line movement and gave them hours to pull the fight. They, meaning the UFC, chose to continue, and from my perspective, are now complicit in fixing a fight. And then an update says, federal regulators have flagged over 100 UFC fights this year for abnormal betting patterns, including 2 additional fighters on last night's card. Shit is about to get very ugly. Still working to confirm, but it sounds like the feds are moving to audit Jason Herzog's fights. Jason Herzog has been called into question because this right here from Superfan McGregor Rousey, one of the funnier meme pages on MMA Twitter, backs this up with what happened at UFC Seattle back in February, which was my first UFC event in person, first and only to this point, where the main event between Song Yadong and Henry Cejudo ended with an eye poke, and we didn't get a no contest. We didn't get a TKO. Jason Herzog, after Henry Cejudo determined that he couldn't continue, started the 4th round and then immediately stopped it and called it in for a doctor's stoppage so that they could judge the scorecards on the 3 rounds that were completed. The post right here says, throwback to when Henry Cejudo got fired and said he couldn't continue. The fight should have been stopped immediately, but instead Herzog forced Cejudo to start the next round so that he would lose the fight instead of the fight being a no contest, quote unquote, yeah, he's guilty. And this is the clip right here. And I was here. We didn't have access to the cage audio from the stands, of course, so it was very confusing to us as to what was going on. But this is the in-cage audio where you hear Jason Herzog as well.
Going on.
Time. I don't think he has to start the 4th round.
He doesn't have to start the 4th round.
Finished.
And you even hear Bisping and Brandon Fitzgerald on commentary saying he does not need to start the 4th round.
It's in the books.
I mean,
Get in here, doctor.
Waves off the fight.
Jason Herzog,
And you hear the crowd go crazy. I remember being in the stands. People were fucking pissed about the way this got handled, because with no explanation from the crowd or to the crowd, you're sitting there. It looks like they're going to stop the fight, but then they go to start the fourth round. Everybody gets super, super happy again that the main event's going to continue. And then Herzog waves it off almost immediately. And this is just so they could score it. He actually explains it. It's on the cage audio here.
So now they hate this, but he figures to get his hand raised and what would be.
And here's Jason Herzog explaining it to Song Yadong's corner, Uriah Faber right here. It's the Team Alpha Male coaches right here. This is what he was explaining to them.
So we'll go to the scorecards. He gets all the way scored through. I don't know how they are, but at least you get that. Because if not, it's a DQ, right?
And Jason Herzog is saying the reason he did that is so that they could have 3 completed rounds out of 5, and therefore the judges could judge it as a technical decision, is what they call that. And that's what happened, but he's saying that the options there were DQ loss for Song Yadong based on the eye poke, or they let the 4th round start so that they can then go on and do the technical decision. And to me, just to me, my opinion, just a guy sitting here with a microphone, this seems like Jason Herzog potentially, I'm not accusing him of anything, but potentially could have had money on the over. Let's say the over was over under 3 rounds or something like that, or 2.5 rounds. They had to complete that 3rd round. Or potentially Jason Herzog was paid to make sure that the fight made it into the 4th round. And he gets very, very stressed trying to explain the situation. When he was explaining it here to the Team Alpha Male coaches, it seems like he's just explaining rules, but then this next 30 seconds, 40 seconds, he seems really, really stressed and trying to keep control of the cage while nobody else was really tripping out other than the fans. So you see him explain it very, very stressed and panicked to Bruce Buffer.
Yes, sir. So
You see the look on his face. He is very adamantly trying to get specific words into the ears of Bruce Buffer so that he can announce it to the audience. Frankly, I mean, look at Jason Herzog's face. He looks stressed about what this happened. I don't think that a referee should be this stressed after handling a foul.
of the scheduled rounds,
People will have more responsibility.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And then here, now that it's going to take place, that announcement that he gave Bruce Buffer, fused and kind of pissed about what happened there. And Henry Cejudo got a lot of shit for this. It's starting to look like, you know, although he got poked in the eye, that he got done pretty dirty here. And I'm just saying, I'm not saying that this is 100% what happened, but it looks suspicious. And here you have paid talking piece for the UFC, who frankly, nobody takes Chael Sonnen seriously at this point, especially after his take on Tom Aspinall's eye poke at UFC 321. But in response to Harry Mack saying that the FBI notified the UFC about the abnormal line movement and that they chose to continue, Chael Sonnen says, "Harry whack, you list no evidence and have no idea who knew what or when. The UFC has obligations and contracts with fighters to put on fights. Your time frame for presenting evidence to UFC disproves your quote theory. Let the pros handle it." And Harry responded by saying, "It really sucks that the legends of the game now are just paid mouths for the worst people alive. Turns out the bad guy is actually just the dumb guy. Who knew?" And frankly, when you have a Chael Sonnen or an Anthony Lionheart Smith, or even like a DC or a John Anik or anything like that, somebody that gets a scheduled paycheck from the UFC for these events and for commentary and their shows, you really, really can't take somebody like Chael Sonnen or Anthony Lionheart Smith seriously. And of course, Harry has said from the start that he cannot disclose his sources yet. He has to verify things. And he says, "For all of you sucking Chael's dick in my mentions, he is a convicted fraudster and money launderer," which is absolutely true. He did get convicted in a money laundering case, something to do with real estate, I think it was. If you're more mad at me for posting a joke than you are for him running cover for a massive fraud, you are an idiot. Some people have really gone at this Harry Mack guy, and here is the It Factor MMA saying, "Do you have any kind of credible source for this? Why are you the only journalist, quote, breaking the news?" Which is not true. I mean, I covered it the night that this happened. And Harry says in response, "Guys, it's almost like mainstream MMA media won't cover this because Big Daddy Dana will take their press credentials away. You are all so thick in the skull." And of course, the last person that crossed Dana White was Ariel Helwani. And while he's not banned anymore, he elects not to go to the UFC events anymore. The last time that this happened, where somebody went against the UFC or a journalist spoke out against the UFC or didn't do exactly what they wanted, Ariel got banned from UFC events, his press credentials revoked. And this is where it starts to get really interesting is, I mean, people are giving a lot of shit to the mainstream outlets like MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, and ESPN MMA, like I mentioned earlier in the video. This right here from @Smoogie MMA, he says, the books refunded bets on Dulgarian, a tacit admission that there's evidence of a fix, agreed. And the MMA rags of record like MMA Junkie, MMA Fighting, and ESPN MMA are asleep at the wheel. No reporting and no reporters who could even do that job anymore. He goes even further to say, some people aren't grasping how potentially bad it is that a James Krause connected fighter just took a confirmed dive, when the previous James Krause fight fixing scandal still goes largely unresolved with a conspicuous lack of follow-up reporting. Junkie did mention it, but didn't have the stones to actually lead with it, subordinating the info under a Michael Chiesa rips Dulgarian's effort headline. And even if you watch live on the broadcast, and I talked about this in my first video as well, Daniel Cormier was very critical of the effort that was put into defending that choke. And this right here is live on the UFC broadcast. And keep in mind, the fight has not been pulled from ESPN+. The UFC's posts about the fight and Yadier Del Valle winning have not been pulled from their IG. And this highlight right here is still live on ESPN MMA. So I didn't have to dig for this at all. The evidence is right out there. And here is DC questioning the effort and skill of Isaac Dulgarian for not defending this choke, although he has been widely considered a top prospect in the featherweight division.
Here, Mike, when he goes under the neck, the only thing you should be doing is hand fighting.
Yeah, but as I said before, the strikes come before the tap. So I think he felt out of desperation just trying something, because he was trying to fight the hands initially to start. And there it is. I mean, he's squeezing on him.
And they clipped out one tiny little bit. You guys can go back and watch it yourself. Right before Joey Martinez reads out the decision, DC says, I'm confused at the lack of knowledge of defending a choke at this high of a level in MMA. So DC, I mean, as innocent as he is, not realizing what was going on in front of him, a fixed fight, he was like, what the fuck was that? And going back to the essential admission of something happening like a fixed fight, you have Caesars Palace Sportsbook, or Caesars Sportsbook support, saying mobile customers with losing bets on the Dulgarian UFC fight will receive a cash credit within 24 hours or within 24 hours of the last leg being determined. Parlay, super parlay, whatever, should that bet have won without that leg included. And then they also say retail customers should hold their tickets, and people telling my bookie to, quote, do the right thing. Now, I did mention that there was an MMA manager, Jason House of Iridium Sports, has get called into question about this because it has been his fighters that have been caught up in these scandals. Derek Minner, James Krause, now Isaac Dulgarian, David Onama. They represent a lot of people. So, of course, it might not be his direct, involvement in a betting scandal, but his fighters are the ones getting caught up. It says, for those demanding red meat, I've reached out to a certain MMA manager as a professional courtesy to give him the chance to explain himself. Should he not explain himself, I'll share what I have without his explanations. And so he says, credit to Jason House for taking my call. He maintains that he and Iridium management had no knowledge of any abnormalities with Dulgarian. House says that he is committed to working with authorities and has assured me he will cut ties with Isaac Dulgarian if it's deemed that he engaged in misconduct. House also directly addressed the idea that he has a matchmaking sway/preferential treatment and upholds he has no familial ties to any UFC matchmaker. He upholds Iridium's stable and preparedness are the only reason they receive these opportunities, and he has no say in matchmaking. For whatever it's worth, the guy seemed genuinely distraught and appreciative that somebody wanted his side. Notably, Jason House states that he has not had contact with James Krause since the Derek Minner scandal and cooperated with authorities in that case. To be clear, there is still a very big issue. The UFC knew of a fight with extremely abnormal betting activity, a $16 million handle on an Apex prelim fight. Just a random Apex prelim where the fights are lower level and more crazy shit can happen. Somebody put $16 million down on that fight. And the UFC and Dulgarian's team proceeded anyway. Heads are still going to roll, but it's unclear who at this point. And Riley Loves MMA said, wait, so what's the red meat, new information that's going to make this worse? And he says, In the spirit of cooperation and respect, I outlined a very serious issue to Jason concerning one of his fighters, and he assured me that he will reach out and cut that fighter as a client. I am giving him the chance to do the right thing before reporting it and ruining a few careers. And down here in the comments, somebody said, if this is about Isaac Dulgarian, this is not new info. And he said it's actually about a different Iridium Sports fighter. And so this is the point that we are at, that the UFC for the second time in 3 years is being wrapped up in a massive betting scandal. I still hold the belief that the UFC is responsible to a certain degree for these things happening, because you have guys that are making way less than a livable wage and fighting for a living, ending up in spots where somebody is offering them money. And I know it shouldn't be like this, but if the UFC did pay people enough money, they wouldn't have to entertain this type of, you know, throw a fight for 20 grand, throw a fight for 50 grand. Of course, I wish everybody involved was making enough money to not have to entertain this. And I wish that everybody involved had enough like honor and respect for the sport and all of that, and their fans that bet money on them to not get wrapped up in a fixed fight scandal. But the reality of the situation is that this is a very real thing, and it's across all major sports. I'll make sure to stay on top of this. This is a big story, but UFC and Dana White are deeply in bed. Kash Patel, the FBI, the President of the United States. I could see this getting swept under the rug and Dana White never announcing it. So there's my thoughts on it, guys. Really, really tough stuff and really heavy things to talk about recently in MMA with the eye poke scandals. And now we have fighters, judges, and referees potentially being involved in a massive, massive fight fixing racket. So let me know your thoughts down below. Who's at fault and what should be done about this? I think you have to ban Isaac Dulgarian for life and raise fighter pay to a certain degree. I think that that would mitigate this problem at all. I mean, I think that we can all agree that prelim fighters in particular should get paid more money. I don't think there's a whole lot of debate as to whether or not they should make more money just based on the small paychecks that they have and the risks taken in this job. But it just gets even more reinforced when we have people fixing fights for money. So let me know your thoughts down below. I'm Wyatt, and this is Fight Society. Do you want more from Fight Society? Like and subscribe below this video and click the join button to become a channel member today to get access to behind the scenes vlogs and members only live streams.